So what then should we make of Kupper's criticisms of Singer's position? Well, it seems that Kupper is correct to suppose that if we're going to craft effective, sustainable policies that are going to really attack and minimize or eliminate these pervasive social ills like extreme poverty, those policies have to be informed by things like political economy and political sociology. And I think Singer can embrace all of that. On the other hand, it seems like criticizing Singer's view because it doesn't have those elements to it is really a bit of what philosophers sometimes call a straw man. So he's putting a lot of stuff onto Singer that Singer isn't intending to accomplish and then criticizing him because he doesn't accomplish it. Because it really doesn't seem like Singer is trying to argue for a particularly nuanced policy approach to dealing with the formulation and evaluation of policies in very specific contexts. Singer really just seems to be arguing that people in affluent countries really do have an obligation to devote significantly more of their disposable income to these goals. And it seems like nothing that Kupper says undermines the case that Singer is trying to make there. I mean, he doesn't really give us a reason not to do that. And he even seems to be endorsing a commitment of greater resources. He does seem to be criticizing specifically the manifestation of that commitment as monetary donations by individuals. But other than that, he seems committed to the greater allocation of resources to mitigate these social ills. However, there are some passages that, when you read them, particularly read them knowing that this is a contentious issue, that lots of people don't want to do this, you either have to wonder if Kupper himself is completely consistent or that he, at the very least, needs to be much more careful in what he says and how he says it. So on page 112 and 13, he characterizes his criticism of Singer as follows. Singer conflates issues of practical reason, our obligations to the vulnerable, with issues of judgment, the obligations of the relatively rich to the poor in the particular case of the world in which we live. If we are to make judgments of how to act in this world, we should not confuse abstract with practical requirements. From the fact that we have an abstract obligation of aid or charity, it does not follow that we are practically obligated to donate to the poor. Now, if we narrowly conceive of donate as giving money specifically to non-specific organizations, then maybe that's consistent with the other things that he seems to say about how we have an obligation to devote significantly more resources to these problems. However, if we just look at it in light of that, if we just say that we're not practically obligated to devote more resources to the mitigation of these social ills, and we understand donate to the poor in that way, that seems like something that is antithetical to everything that Singer's argued for and that he provides no reason to accept. In fact, it doesn't even look consistent with a lot of his statements about Singer and what he agrees with in Singer. So if we read him charitably, we should think, well, look, no, we have an obligation to the poor. We don't have an obligation, you argue, to make non-specific donations of money to alleviating poverty. We need to be smarter about it. That way of construing it makes it a little less problematic. But if you're, a venture capitalist reading this article and you go through it and you look at donate to the poor, you're going to probably read that in ways that Singer thinks is absolutely incorrect and that don't seem consistent with other things that Kuper says and that he doesn't give any reason to support. The other passage that I find to be troubling that way is this passage on page 112. So Kuper argues that one way that you can help poor people in countries like South Africa is to change your economic behavior. So when you buy furniture, buy furniture that's made from woods that are sustainably grown in these countries. When you buy coffee, buy free-trade coffee. So things of that nature. Right? And that's a practice that's been around for at least 20 years. It's a practice that Singer endorses. There doesn't seem to be anything questionable about that. But then he goes on and says this. So when Singer says that luxuries are unnecessary, he is right that rich individuals can survive without them, but wrong to think that poor people can. That is, that their well-being is independent of the market in luxury goods. Now, this strikes me as a pretty bold empirical claim. So to be a luxury good, you have to be something that people don't really need. Furniture, if you're buying furniture every year, you're buying furniture even though your old furniture is just fine, things like that, might be construed as a luxury item. Coffee, probably not so much, right? Clothing, unless it's high fashion, probably not so much. But the phrasing, market in luxury goods, sort of suggests things like new television sets, or even worse, right? I don't know, mega yachts, G5 aircrafts, things of this nature, and particularly when you're talking about rich individuals. So he says, look, Singer says that luxuries are unnecessary. He's right to think that rich individuals can survive without them. So we're talking about rich individuals and talking about poor individuals. And now we're claiming that the welfare of poor people is dependent upon, linked to, that they can't survive without the production of luxury goods. And that strikes me as dubious at best. There are no mega yacht yards in Madagascar. There's a lot of extreme poverty, no mega yacht yards. There are no television assembly plants in Madagascar. There are no, you name it, right? Computer assembly plants in Madagascar. They don't make iPhones there, and so on and so on. Right? And in fact, when you're thinking about luxury items in the sense of things that people don't really need to buy, it's not at all clear that the health and welfare of people in impoverished countries is dependent in any way, shape, or form on Bill Gates buying $50,000 umbrella stands, on people buying designer dresses for $200,000, on investments in Monet art and things like that. So at the very least, you need to be much more careful about how you phrase this stuff so that it's not easy to misconstrue or misquote it out of context. And it's worrisome that there are a number of phrases like this that sort of suggest that lip service is being paid to this idea that we have a greater commitment. But that really what's being talked about is that, look, we've got to take this sort of pro-business approach to developing the third world where, trickle-down economics will rule the day. And he sort of at certain points tries to specifically distance himself from that. But then he says things like this as well. And so it's hard to get a read on him. And I think part of what Singer would find troubling with him is just that.